Did Canada just outsmart the US in the trade war? Tonight, I'm announcing that Canada will be responding to the US trade action deal. But what does this mean for North America's economy? Was this a strategic move or a last-ditch effort to protect Canadian industries? And did President Donald Trump underestimate Canada's ability to fight back? Canada's response to Trump's aggressive tariff policies was swift, decisive, and strategically calculated to hit the American auto industry where it hurt the most. The tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on Canadian exports were seen as a direct attack on Canada's economic stability, particularly its crucial manufacturing sector. In retaliation, Canada pulled the trigger on countermeasures designed to strike at the heart of the US economy, the automotive industry, a pillar of American manufacturing and employment. This counterstrike sent shockwaves through both economic and political spheres on both sides of the border, escalating tensions between the two long-standing allies. The North American auto industry is deeply intertwined, with supply chains crisscrossing national borders multiple times before a finished vehicle rolls off the assembly line. Canada is home to key manufacturing plants that produce essential components, from advanced automotive electronics to precision-engineered steel parts. The industry operates on a just-in-time manufacturing model, meaning that even minor disruptions can create catastrophic ripple effects throughout the supply chain. By targeting critical exports, Canada's retaliatory measures were designed to bring American assembly lines to a grinding halt, causing delays, layoffs, and financial losses that would reverberate across the entire economy. The economic logic behind Canada's counterstrike was clear. The United States heavily depends on Canadian parts and materials, and any disruption in this flow would paralyze production for major automakers, including Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. The measures imposed were not just symbolic. They were crafted to exert maximum pressure in the shortest time possible. The restrictions targeted high-value components essential to vehicle production, including specialized aluminum, steel, wiring harnesses, and transmission systems. Without these parts, even the most powerful American automakers would be unable to meet production schedules, leading to an immediate workforce crisis in an industry that directly employs nearly 1 million Americans and supports millions more. In related sectors, American automotive executives were left scrambling, caught off guard by the sheer force of Canada's response. While Trump's tariffs were framed as a means of protecting US industries, they failed to account for the deeply interconnected nature of North American manufacturing. The Trump administration had wagered that Canada would negotiate under pressure, but instead, the counterstrike demonstrated that Canada was fully prepared to defend its economic interests with surgical precision. The repercussions of this move were felt almost instantly as US automakers faced mounting production bottlenecks, factory slowdowns, and the looming threat of mass layoffs. The impact extended far beyond the factory floors of Detroit and Ohio. Wall Street took notice, with stock prices for American automakers plunging in response to the uncertainty. Investors quickly realized that supply chain disruptions would not only harm profitability but also shake consumer confidence in the industry. As uncertainty loomed over production capabilities, car dealerships braced for vehicle shortages, leading to price hikes and potential losses in market share. With supply chain disruptions increasing costs, consumers turned to foreign automakers unaffected by the trade dispute. The crisis was no longer confined to the factories. It was creeping into the pockets of everyday Americans who relied on affordable and readily available vehicles. Politically, Canada's bold move sent a clear message to the Trump administration. Economic aggression would be met with equally forceful resistance. The retaliatory tariffs highlighted Canada's willingness to leverage its economic strength in a way Washington had not anticipated. The Trump administration, which prided itself on negotiating from a position of dominance, suddenly found itself on the defensive. The American public, many of whom had supported the tariffs under the assumption that they would strengthen domestic manufacturing, now faced the real-world consequences of their government's economic brinkmanship. Workers in states that had overwhelmingly voted for Trump were among the first to feel the sting as factory closures and furloughs became an imminent reality. Canada's counterstrike didn't just impact the auto sector, it sent a message to other American trade partners as well. It signaled that retaliation against protectionist policies was not only possible, but effective. Other nations closely watched the unfolding economic standoff, weighing their own responses to Trump's broader trade agenda. Canada's response set a precedent for future trade disputes, proving that even the most integrated economies could weaponize supply chains if provoked. For policymakers in Washington, the unexpected pushback from a close ally forced a reassessment of how trade negotiations were conducted in an increasingly interconnected world. Beyond the immediate economic and political turmoil, Canada's move had a significant psychological effect. It shattered the assumption that the US could unilaterally dictate trade terms without consequence. The retaliatory measures demonstrated that economic interdependence meant that no country, no matter how powerful, was immune to the consequences of protectionist policies. Canada's response was not only about safeguarding its own economy, but also about reinforcing the idea that free and fair trade required mutual respect. The decision to target the auto industry was calculated to create maximum leverage, ensuring that Washington would have no choice but to reconsider its approach. Meanwhile, inside Canadian borders, the move was widely supported. Canadian businesses, unions, and government officials rallied behind the countermeasures, recognizing them as necessary to protect domestic jobs and economic stability. The manufacturing sector in Canada had long been wary of American protectionist tendencies, and Trump's tariffs were seen as a direct threat to Canadian livelihoods. The swift and targeted response reassured industries that their government was willing to take a firm stand against economic aggression. While some feared that the escalation could lead to further economic strife, most understood that inaction would be far worse, allowing the US to dictate terms without resistance. As the economic war unfolded, US automakers and their workers faced mounting uncertainty. Assembly lines that had operated smoothly for decades were now at the mercy of unpredictable trade policies. The auto industry's complex logistics, which once ensured efficiency and cost savings, had now become a point of vulnerability. Layoffs and production shutdowns loomed as executives struggled to source alternative suppliers, a near impossible task given the specialized nature of Canadian-made components. The realization began to sink in that the tariffs had not strengthened the American economy, but had instead triggered an economic self-inflicted wound. American consumers, too, began to feel the effects of the trade war. With production bottlenecks stalling vehicle output, new car prices surged, dealerships faced inventory shortages, and the once reliable supply of North American-made vehicles became increasingly constrained. This shift disproportionately affected middle-class Americans, many of whom had supported Trump's economic policies in the hope of seeing domestic industries flourish. Instead, they found themselves paying higher prices for vehicles while witnessing job losses in their communities. Economists warned that the longer the dispute continued, the more permanent the damage would become. The auto industry, which had spent decades refining its cross-border supply chains for efficiency, now faced the prospect of restructuring its entire production model. Some companies considered moving operations elsewhere, exploring alternative markets that would not be subject to volatile trade disputes. The uncertainty surrounding the industry also dampened investor confidence, leading to capital flight from a sector once considered a pillar of the American economy. What had started as a strategy to protect US manufacturing had in reality placed it in jeopardy. Canada's decision to strike back so aggressively was a turning point in North American trade relations. It shattered the notion that the United States could act unilaterally without consequence, reminding Washington that trade agreements existed for a reason. The counterstrike proved that Canada was not merely a passive participant in the global economy, but a nation capable of leveraging its economic strengths when necessary. This new reality forced American policymakers to reconsider their approach as they faced the unintended consequences of their own protectionist policies. The consequences of Canada's countermeasures extended far beyond economics. They reshaped diplomatic relations between the two countries. The long-standing friendship between Canada and the US had always been built on mutual cooperation, but the trade war exposed cracks in this foundation. In the end, while Trump's tariffs aimed to boost American manufacturing, they set off a chain reaction of retaliatory measures that ultimately undermined the very industries they sought to protect. Canada's counterstrike delivered a clear and undeniable message. Economic warfare comes with consequences, and no nation, no matter how powerful, is immune to the fallout.